Hello. I'm experimenting a little bit with the microphone as I keep listening back and things, and I think the microphone also automatically came with some noise cancelling software that I think might be why my voice keeps going up and down and getting cut off and stuff like that. It's not a great microphone, it's just a headset mic for Skype and stuff. But I've disabled that. So hopefully that, if that was the thing that's doing it, it won't be doing it anymore. I also think it keeps trying to automatically balance my voice. So if I talk really loud and then I talk really quietly, things get muffled in a very odd way. So we'll find out how this whole thing turns out. It may be just impossible to listen to, but I'll put it up on YouTube anyway, because that's the kind of person I am. Needless oversharer. So back to this page. We've almost finished it. We've got backgrounds, we've done most of the colours. We've just got to do one more bit of shading and then speech bubbles. So the way I do shading is I take my magic wand tool and I make sure that it's not contiguous, so that when I select the colour that I want to shade on the color level, it will select every single part of it in every single panel. Then right click, layer via copy, and then I press this lock transparency. You may have used lock editing before, lock movement. Lock transparency means that you cannot alter any part that is transparent. So I'm pushing right now and nothing's happening, but if I push over here, stuff happens, because that part has pixels in it. And that is what enables me to shade comfortably without ruining the rest of my art. Different things, when you're shading, have different reflective indexes. Hair is pretty much the most shiny thing on a human body, unless somebody's wearing metal for some reason. Clothes and skin aren't very reflective, unless you are glistening with sweat for some reason, or are wearing an unusual piece of clothing like leather or latex or spandex, which most people don't wear on a day-to-day basis, although I'm sure some do. So for hair, I tend to create 5 levels of shading. Not always, but usually. So that's 2 layers of shade and 3 layers of highlight. And I think that creates quite an effective hair tone, even if it isn't entirely realistic. Whereas for clothing and skin and stuff like that, usually 1 layer of shade is enough, or if it is especially shiny for whatever reason, 1 layer of shade and a highlight. This isn't always the case. Some characters like Cat have very light coloured hair as a base, and so their hair colour, I tend to think, is sufficient with just 2 pieces of shading, because any amount of highlighting that I would do would just confuse things. I mean, nobody's hair goes white, so if you have very pale hair, it's difficult to get the shading in. Had I known this at the start, when I was choosing the hair colour, I probably wouldn't have chosen that specific hair colour. But it is a challenge to get it to work right. Hannah is the same shading, and this character here with blue hair, which I know doesn't exist in real life. I like that particular character to have blue hair. Figuring out what the right amounts of shading are to look realistic is an interesting challenge with different characters. But in general, hair should be the shiniest part of a human being, unless they, as I said, are wearing metal or latex or something. There are whole books on the subject of that sort of thing that you can get hold of. well, not books entirely dedicated to that subject. That would be a bit strange. Just have a book of all materials known to man with, this is more reflective than this, which is more reflective than this, which is more reflective than this, would be remarkably boring. Although I presume there are strange engineering technical manuals which do state the refractive index and so on of various different materials, along with other properties like their weight, the specific mass, their tensile strength, that sort of thing. Because there's technical manuals for everything, really. So yeah, this is the process I do with every character's hair. Crusader has 5 levels. Jin has 5 levels. Most of the characters do. And it's not just laziness when they have 2, or less than 5. As you can see, I do try and keep it a chaotic, sort of scrubby shape. Sometimes when I'm shading, I will draw out a block of shading and then fill it. So with this bit of the shirt, I might have drawn round here and then just use the fill tool to fill it. But yeah, it's entirely dependent on what I feel like. I kind of prefer the direct control that I can get with the brush and controlling it all myself, and not having large areas of black, large areas of shade that are just block filled. But it depends on, oops, what am I doing? It depends on lighting, it depends on the brush size, it depends on how bored I am. Not bored, but if I've been working for a very long time, I tend to not be as happy with doing things the correct way. You know what they say, there's the correct way and the easy way, which is not always true, but is often true. And the longer I've been working on a page, the more likely I am to take the easy way out and block fill some space. Another thing, if I think it's taking too long with a good sized brush, is I might increase the brush size. So 19 pixels at this particular resolution is a very good size for when you zoom out. You get a quite nice effect. But if it's taking a long time to fill certain aspects, making the brush size much bigger fills things much faster and saves time, which sometimes is very important to me, because each page is between 4 and 6 hours work. The more complicated it is, the longer it takes. Better people than me can tell you how to shade exactly and the science behind it, and why certain things reflect the way they do. For me, in general, I just tend to pick a light source and work on the basis of where that light source is coming from. Very, very good artists will light scenes like a film studio, where they think about the primary light source and the fill light and the backlight and the reflections, and they get incredibly complicated and very clever ways of thinking about it. So for me, in general, if light's coming from this direction, then the shade should be over here, and so on. But they will be thinking about, but we'll have light coming from that direction or that direction to backfill, so there'll be a line there and all of that sort of thing, which I respect, but I don't have the time for, and I've not gone to any form of education for it, so I just try and do my best and muddle through. No doubt everybody who is watching can tell that I read a lot of manga when I was young, which is no bad thing, but they do all come with a certain style, which if I had learned to draw properly instead of learning to copy manga, I probably would have certain elements of my work very different. Just a final highlight on all of this. If anybody does want to be a manga artist, go... Hang on a minute, have I done this wrong? I've done this wrong. Oh well. If anybody does want to be a manga artist, learn to be a traditional artist first. You will make better art when you come to be a manga artist. Manga artists don't go to manga school, they go to art school, and then they make manga. It's, well, some might go to manga school, I don't know. Point is, learning the traditional, correct proportions for things will make you a better artist than if you just learned to copy Naruto, which is a little bit what I did. But when you're 15, manga seems like the easy way, and it's only once you've been drawing it for far too long you realize, oh shoot, I don't know how anatomy actually works, and then you have to unlearn things, which is way harder than just learning them, because you've got to think about how bones actually fit together, and you've got to think about how muscles attach to the bones, and how eyes work, and learn all the muscles in a smile, and so on and so forth, which, it's easy just to learn from the start. You will draw better doing things the hard way, which, as I said, is the easy way and the right way. Do things the right way. Otherwise you'll be like me. Haha! Who wants that? Who wants that? I know I don't. Just finishing this up. As you can tell, I picked the wrong colours, and I am colourblind, so it's not easy for me to tell at the offset that I've done it wrong. It's only by contrast machine process that I realise that. But hey ho. Such is life. I think this page is about done. As you can see, I've got a lot of layers here from all the shading, because each bit of shading is on a different layer. Usually what I do is I just group those up so they're easier to manage, and then I can turn shading off, turn it on, turn it off, turn it on. Another thing that I did that I didn't show you is all these people, they got pupils and reflections in their eyes. That's just a separate layer on top of everything else. Again, I keep layers separate, so if I screw up, it's easier to fix. Pretty much ready to just do speech bubbles and render. So that's what I'm going to do. Just quick save. Quite got my layer order correct. Elliptical tool is great for speech bubbles. If anybody's interested in making these in detail, I suggest you go and watch my speech bubbles in 60 seconds tutorial. Photoshop doesn't make it easy as some programs. Manga Studio has speech bubbles built right in that automatically change their size and rendering and everything based on what text is in them. It's very easy to get good looking speech bubbles in Manga Studio. So I'm just going to make that a rectangle because it's a little bit easier. But with Photoshop there's nothing built in, so you've got to just try and figure it out for yourselves. Some people like to draw theirs by hand. If you've ever watched the Penny Arcade guy, whose name currently escapes me, Mike something, he will draw all his speech bubbles by hand. It gives them a very fluid look, but I don't trust myself to freehand that well. So I use the elliptical tool and the polygon lasso tool, which does the tails. I used to have a rule about how far tails should go. Generally, they should go 75% of the way to the mouth from where they are positioned in the bubble. But after doing a couple of comics with that as a hard rule, you quickly just learn what it should look like, and then you're good to go. You don't need to measure it out every time, because that would be a very, very high workload for not much gain. I'm still learning in some ways how to make it obvious that one speech bubble goes over another. Because one thing I found is, with them being very far to the right and to the left, which is good for layout, but it can be difficult to realize, oh, you read that one, then that one, then that one. That's still something I'm working on. The big thing is whoever's on the left should have their speech bubble on the left. Whoever's on the right, speech bubble on the right. Mixing that up is just the worst mistake you can make in comics. Sometimes the layout and the way everything's working, you kind of have to make it flow correctly. But 99 times in 100, or even 999,999 in a million, never ever have the left-hand person have their speech bubble on the right. It looks awful. And it doesn't flow very well. And if you're making this mistake yourself, don't feel bad. Everyone makes mistakes. Just stop it. Stop it right now. And put your speech bubbles on the correct place. And plan your art with where the speech bubbles are going to go. You don't necessarily have to do what I do, which is put the text in first thing. But you do have to think all the way when you're drawing, where is the speech bubble going to go? I find it easiest to put the text in to help keep that in mind, but just always be thinking about it. Anyway, on a speech bubble layer, going to go back to the marquee tool, right-click, stroke. A reasonable size at this resolution is 15 pixels. It'll be different depending on what resolution you're working at. Fill it with white. Whoops. Turn off contiguous, then fill it with white. And every panel is now good to go. There's a couple of ways that you can render in Photoshop. If you press Control, Shift, Alt, and S all at the same time, you'll probably get this warning. And then you can save for web and devices. And then you can choose PNGs and JPEGs and all the rest, and how big you want them to be. That tends to chew up a lot of RAM, and depending on your machine you might not do that well. It's also less useful than it used to be. This function was really handy in the old days of the internet, when you had to really worry about what your image looked like and how big it was, because it tells you, how big it is in kilobytes, how long it will take to load on different connections. It's a very useful tool for that, but now most of the world has pretty fast internet for images. Anything less than a megabyte loads pretty damn quickly, and most people post to things like Tumblr and other websites that will shrink them down further anyway. So it sort of doesn't matter. So in general, I don't do that anymore. I just save it as a PNG file myself, and then shrink it down manually using the image, and then image size. That's the way I tend to do that. and it makes the file sizes slightly larger, but it's much less resource intensive on computers. And the one thing that you don't want is to accidentally crash your machine just as you finished a page, because if you forgot to save, you're screwed, and if you did remember to save, it's really annoying. So these days you can usually leave out the save for web and devices feature and just save it directly as what you want. And that's basically it. You've seen me make almost all a page, cut out some of the boring stuff in the middle, and you've listened to me ramble on quite a lot. So thank you for that. If you have made it all the way to the end, you may feel incredibly self-satisfied and smug compared to all the people who left. I don't have any secrets to impart. I might do some of these again, I might not. We'll see how things go. So that's Crusader 1089 saying so long, and see you again soon.